This is the E911 Talk podcast, episode 76, for Monday, March 19, 2012.
Welcome to this edition of E911 Talk with your host, Mark Fletcher, pilot line manager for emergency services at Avaya. Now, here's Fletch.
Once again, Michigan makes the news with some new legislation that makes swatting a felony punishable by up to 4 years in jail. Now, pretty much since the invention of the telephone, people have used the device to play jokes on their friends and colleagues. During my younger days, caller ID didn't even exist, so playing pranks were quite easy. But the pranks that we played in those days were fairly harmless. Hello, this is the telephone company repairman calling. We're going to be working on your phone lines, so please don't answer your telephone for the next hour or so. We'd then call back the number over and over and over again. Inevitably, the people weren't able to resist the urge to answer, and then when they would, we'd scream as loud as we could. Now, I guess for a 14-year-old back in the mid-70s, that was pretty funny. Today, however, the technology exists in several different forms that allows a caller to manipulate their caller ID or use other services that effectively mask the originating caller from public safety. Now, for all the little hackers out there, I'm not going to go into it any further, so go find another spot to do your research. Swatting usually entails making false emergency calls to a 911 center. At that point, social engineering is used to convince the 911 call taker that a horrible crime has or is about to occur. The hopes of the swatter is to provoke a response by the SWAT team to show up at the innocent person's address, while the swatter sits back and watches the mayhem. This past week, Representative Kurt Heise introduced House Bill 5431 in Michigan, which makes swatting a felony in that state. Heise stated, "The innocent victims of swatting have literally been woken up in the middle of the night to find SWAT teams with guns drawn at their window or doorstep. Our emergency first responders don't have the time or resources to respond to false crisis events. We need to take a strong stance against swatting before an innocent victim or emergency first responder is killed or resources are misdirected," unquote. Now, every few weeks it seems that a new swatting incident shows up in the news. In fact, the FBI reports that between 2002 and 2006, just 5 specific swatters made over 100 calls to 60 different agencies nationwide. Now, in addition to disrupting emergency services, those incidents resulted in up to $250,000 in losses in manpower for the agencies. Now, with today's agencies scraping to save every single dollar they can, the financial impact of being swatted affects public safety as well as the public that they're trying to protect. Now, one of the areas of major concern with next generation 911 is the security and authentication built into that network of networks. As we're all aware today, email phishing, identity theft, and impersonation are all too easy to accomplish with common technology available today. So without the proper planning and protection, the next generation 911 network of tomorrow is going to be a primary target. Now, the one saving grace in all this is that the enterprise businesses have been connected to the internet for over a decade now. Best practices have been established, and what was once a very closed environment, only available to specific individuals through pinhole firewalls, has been opened up to a level where most companies have open browsing and internet access, with the exception of some sites being deemed inappropriate. Should public safety attach directly to the internet? That's a question that often gets discussed, and it's got valid points on both sides of the argument. The conservative approach is to maintain complete separation between the public safety network and the evil, malware-infested internet. That's what I call the bubble boy approach. Another approach, which I feel is a little more rational and appropriate, is the guarded DMZ approach. Think of the DMZ as a buffered zone between public safety and that big scary internet. It's kind of like a doctor saying, "I'm not touching that, get me a set of gloves." So with the traffic isolated within a DMZ, additional actions can be taken by profiling the data as well as its source. And this brings up the concept of a black, gray, and white list that I spoke about in a previous podcast. If you're a trusted entity and can provide credentials that prove that, you'll be on the white list. If you're new to the network and trust has not been established, you're on the gray list, and additional security checks are then leveraged against you. If you've been a bad boy in the past and the network recognizes you, well, you're on the blacklist and are going to receive a base level of service at a lower priority. Now, in addition to applying that to individual identities, the same logic can be applied to suspicious profiles based on a number of other things, including the device, the access method, or even the contextual data that surrounds the call. This is one example where profiling might actually be a good thing.
You've been listening to the E911 Talk podcast with your host, Mark Fletcher, product line manager for emergency services at Avaya. E911 Talk is a weekly podcast available on sites like this, as well as iTunes, and is available free of charge. If you have any comments or questions, you can email Fletch at fletcherm@avaya.com. That's Fletcher, the letter M, at avaya.com. Be sure to listen in next week for more informative topics on E911.